that's a perfect segue into our last panellist, Caroline, as the story costumer. So, Caroline, I'm really curious to know more about how you became the story costumer, what your story is around that. But also, as Jacqueline's talked about, the importance of people being able to tell their stories. Would love to hear about what the way that both again, the impact of the pandemic, but the work that you do to bring together the storytelling in relation to people's mental health. So tell us about, as I said, your story as the story costumer.
Before I start, I just want to segue in. A couple of people have commented in the chat section around their connection to nature and gardening and green things. And I think that's a really classic example of how in any situation we find the tools that work for us. And gardens are often a very accessible way. And if you weren't able to get out, a lot of people got into gardening from home, pot plants, all those things sold they were growth industries during the pandemic. And I think the story costumer really was just another example of how you take a situation and you create what you need. And sometimes in doing that, you tell a story that's powerful and others engage with that story, which is what's happened for me. So I've got a 35-year background in the community sector from direct service delivery to project management to working in corporate environments to working at DHS doing complex traumatic projects to community health. So I've worked the full gamut, and I've worked also extensively with carers and have both lived and personal experience of, in our family unit of where we need to be service system users and where we, and that's ongoing for us. So I kind of have got a few different hats, both physically and actually. And I suppose my story started when I was probably in community health and had been there for 8 years and wasn't loving it anymore. And I never thought I'd say that because I am someone that brings a huge amount of passion to whatever I do. And I didn't have it anymore. And I was curious about that. So I suppose I took my greatest ally, my mother, out. We were out for an afternoon tea. And she said, "You don't seem very happy. What would you do if you weren't doing what you did now?" And I said, like most of us do, I don't know, because we're stuck in our story. We're stuck in our everyday stories. And I suppose she was presenting a great opportunity for me to rethink my own story. So I said, "I'd set up a costume shop." She said, "So go do it. Stop complaining. Get on with it." So over time I did. And I call myself a magical costume shop owner because my costume shop's pretty unique. Anyone that's been there or seen it, either on Instagram or websites, I create a space that is not so much about stories, but costumes, but is about a unique opportunity to talk and feel your way through whatever story you need to tell. So my stories may be something, people may come in to borrow a top hat to go to a steampunk party, but they might also come in and sit in my golden throne, which you can just see the top of here, my golden throne, where people come in and sit down. Sometimes they knit. Sometimes they tell me about things that are going on. It's just kind of like a little bit of an enchanting place where people feel they can lighten their load a bit. Sometimes they don't actually know what they want when they come into the shop, but they come out going, "Oh, I didn't really expect that." So costumes and storytelling have this unique ability to sit in adult imagination, tapping into adult longing, adult lack of belonging. And people would often come to the door and stand there and go, "Oh, I don't dress up." And then within 5 minutes, they'd have a Viking hat and a cloak on and they'd be marching through the facility looking very inspired and very, very energized. So I've seen this over and over where people have a story that they tell about themselves, which is often not, which is actually stored in their body with their trauma and their adversity. And we all see that in our work, that people tell us one thing, but we're viewing another very different story.
Caroline, what brings people to your shop or your studio? What is it, because they're looking for, as you said, an outfit to wear to some sort of a fancy dress event, or because they know, they understand the sort of, the work that you do around that storytelling?
Oh, look, it's various. It started off word of mouth. It started off because I started Instagram stories, and I do almost like photo documentaries using, people wearing their costume and telling the story. So people find that engages them and they want to know more. When we're curious about something, we step towards it. We don't tend to constrict. We tend to contract. We tend to be, which is a much better space to do life from. We find solutions from stepping in, and when we're curious, we're more likely to find them. So, yeah, people might come for a costume, but they're more likely come in because they've, I don't know, I think an innate sense of curiosity they want to explore, or someone tells them about it. I had someone bring someone from a social support service bring 3 people in. All of them were people that in their past had sung. So in the end, I had 3 operatic women singing with beautiful costumes straight around them, which I've got on video. And that's the moments that I cherish, when an 87-year-old photographer comes in, and there's something about the space, the playfulness of children's space that actually allows people to be whatever they want. And sometimes that can actually let us let go of something that's too heavy, which most experience. So yeah, it's about letting go of the strong emotion.
Okay, so what can you talk about? What things have been like, for you in terms of running your business and your own, the impact of the pandemic, but also what you've noticed around, older women and the impact on them more generally?
It's interesting because I left the field after 35 years as someone with a lived experience of mental health. That was something I didn't want to acknowledge. I had quietly put that in a little place that was invisible. Right. And I think many of us do that. We're stoic copers and we just keep going. But when you're sitting outside the car at your work and you don't want to go in and you can't find the resource within yourself to keep doing the work, it's time to have a look. To reach out, because there are incredible resources and supports available for you, but mostly we're too busy just getting on and doing the work. And the more balls we throw in through adversity, the more difficult that gets. So the pandemic in some ways gave many people an opportunity to sit in a space. For some, it was deeply uncomfortable. For others, it was a great opportunity to sit quietly with the stuff that was going on and work out solutions. For me, I felt like I'd actually learnt lots of tools in leaving work and trying to, I suppose, look at my family unit and go, what needs to be different to make it work? And I needed to spend a different proportion of time doing the tasks I was doing. And I couldn't work full time in a dynamic and difficult work environment and have a child with multiple disabilities and a parent that was aging and have my own stuff and have, everyday griefs all in one. It's just, it doesn't work. So what the costume shop has given me is a unique opportunity to create a better work-life balance, to present and put all my wisdoms around me, because that makes a better balanced experience. And then when you do that, you're more authentic and you're more likely to be supportive and helpful to others. And I think, one of the takeaways for me is look to the helpers. They're everywhere, but we don't see them through our busyness. We don't see the opportunities of support that are all around us. And they might be very simple things, but they're everywhere. It is a much kinder world than we would have. The social media world will tell us. There's lots of really wonderful things everywhere. So I capitalize on that. I'm tapping into joy. During the pandemic, I had to close for 5 months or 4 months. I had an exhibition the week of lockdown that didn't happen. But I went on to have another exhibition in September, which was very successful because it was created in the quiet, not created in the busyness. So it was a different exhibition, but I think it was a better exhibition because of it. I couldn't see my mum, who was in lockdown, which was very hard. My child had an operation during that time and we weren't allowed to attend. So there was lots of things in pandemic that were hard. But I think that I use simple tools, and I don't think tools for healing need to be complicated. Wisdoms are not complicated. If you look at our traditional elders, They sit on the land, they go to country, they share food. I because I'm a material, I use material and I tell fabric stories. I find that I knit or create things with fibre. And my current self-soothing project is my giant. This started as a tiny ball of string, and this is my thread story. So when people tell me a story, there's a thread for all of them. And this is going to be so big, it won't be able to get out of a door. And then I'm going to put it in a wheelbarrow and take it around and talk to people in the community about their stories. And I'm going to write those stories and put them out in the world. That's just string. It's not
so
every
piece of string represents a story that somebody else has told you.
Told me, or my own stories. It might be a bit of clothing that's been cut up as part of someone's grief process to let go of an old story that's no longer useful. So, you know, it's just a ball of string, but geez, powerful, and it weighs about 5 kilos now. So, so look forward to the big ball of string sometime soon at a community event near you.
Caroline, I just wanted to touch on you made a couple of mentions about grief, your own grief, or, you know, the sort of everyday, the grief being part of sort of everyday life, small griefs, often adding up, you know, and you've talked about people with a heavy grief. And I'm just wanting to, you know, going back to sort of Jacqueline's story or, you know, comments around grief. Is that something that you've seen more of in the last, over the last few months, or have you seen an increased sort of willingness or indeed desire for people to actually open up and talk about that experience?
What I found is that grief is omnipresent if it is in your life. And even if you're not aware of it, it will needle away at you until you express it. So what I found is a lot of people were really shocked at the level of sadness, grief, and overwhelm they felt in pandemic isolation because they weren't having opportunities to hide from it. We aren't busy. We aren't at the gym every day. We aren't doing for someone else. We aren't shopping for the third time that week. We aren't dropping something off for our parents. We're sitting in our space. So the grief has a unique and wonderful opportunity to be experienced. So one of the lovely opportunities I had last year was for a woman in her late 60s, and she'd lost a son about 6 years ago, which was a very, very traumatic event in her life to lose the son. But she found it really difficult to grieve because she was so busy. So we made her a cloak, and we made it in fabric and materials that sensory-wise felt good for her, and colours that were, you know, evocative for her. And then we made pockets to put all memories and photos in. And she wore that cloak when she needed an opportunity to grieve and permission not to be interrupted by her family. It became the metaphor for when I've got my cloak on, leave me alone. I need to be with my son. And so that was a powerful way of her telling the story in a way that became empowering for her as she learned to live and sit with her grief, which was all-consuming for her up until that point. So it was quite an honour to do that work. That's the less playful side of costuming, but costuming can be about, I'm doing another series at the moment for an exhibition next year called Cloaks of Courage, and they're for people living with a major experience of life-changing adversity. So I'm making one for a friend with that's living with HIV. Another, I've already made one for a friend living with a brain tumour. I've done one for a woman living with complex diabetes. So they all tell amazing stories because of their adversity. They've made them unique and remarkable people beyond where they already are. So I'm capturing the power stories. The costumes actually bring power to people's unique experiences when they are engaged in the creation of their own costume. So
Caroline, I'm interested that, you know, you talked about your sort of 35 years work in the sort of community or human services sector. And you've obviously brought lots of those skills you know, to your current job and life, but I'm interested to see that it's energizing rather than burning you out, as you know was your previous experience. So I'm just wondering, you know, you're still obviously dealing with, you know, heavy issues, heavy topics, the sort of, you know, people's vulnerabilities. So what makes it different for you in this experience now?
Well, look, I have to say, in my time in the field, it wasn't always de-energising. I loved the community sector. I'm a big, passionate believer of the incredible work that many of the staff still do, and many of the volunteers, and many of the people with experience in the sector as change agents. But I think I just had too many balls in the air. So it was harder to keep myself okay. And I think it's really important to look at those personal things that do keep you intact. Okay. And the more of those we lose, the less able we are to be expansive in what we do. So, you know, there's a creep. You start off, you lose someone you love, and then you get a health issue that's a little bit complicated, and your work throws in another project for you to manage on top of a busy role. It's by stealth we all of a sudden go, oh my goodness, I'm not coping so well anymore. But we're loath to do that because the ban word, and we're talking about it today, wisdom and resilience. We're supposed to be resilient. When I was offered the chance to do this, I was in the middle of a depressive episode and thinking, how can I talk about resilience? But that's exactly when we need to talk about it, because resilience is for every day, not just when we're powerful and great, not when we've got good hair, not when we're the right weight and our pants fit. Resilience is for every day, and we have to reach for tools all the time. So as soon as you're starting to feel the cracks, you need to look to your own tools. We are our greatest asset we have. You know, other people, I can go to a counsellor, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a doctor. Those doctors cannot make me find my own tools. They can suggest I do. And I think the story costumer really just is a space where I'm encouraging people, not in an authoritarian way, I'm not a professional. I'm wearing a silly hat. It's very hard to take me seriously. But it gives people permission to actually find the tools in a different way that's non-confronting.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of that. It's been really fascinating. And we'll go to questions shortly. But before we do, I just wanted to go back to you, Ilsa, and some comments you made earlier that I was reminded of with Caroline talking about, you know, sort of creativity and finding sort of more creative ways. And a lot of what Caroline has talked about is, again, that connection, that, you know, how we find meaning and purpose. I just feel like we've really gone sort of full circle around the panel, and the comments you've made have all just, you know, gelled together so well. But you spoke earlier about, you know, for older people, for instance, who are at home and might be reliant on, you know, carers coming in, and you made the comment about, you know, they're sort of reliant on the creativity of those carers as to, you know, what their day or what their you know, that period of time might look like. So, you know, I was really struck by that comment when you made it, and I wonder how, you know, how can we as service providers then, you know, look at sort of either bringing more creativity, or, as you said, everybody there's no sort of test or no right and wrong answer to what provides meaning or purpose for somebody. So as service providers, how can we do that better? How can we be, you know, working with older people who need that support to be able to provide that in a way that does reinforce the sort of, you know, their purpose and meaning in life?
There's lots I could say about that. Two key things, I guess, that I want to offer into that. One is that us, if we're in supporting roles with older people, actually I think just all of us should do this anyway, but particularly in response to this question, if we're in supporting roles with older people, we need to attend to our own aging. So the kind of golden question is, you know, how do I feel about my own aging? And as, Carolyn's talked about space to sit and be with, because that is a question that most of us retreat from, like at 100 miles an hour, because it's rather unpopular, aging. It's this terrible, the way that the discourse, the things that people that said about it, and then the kind of, the media frenzy, I guess, around this drive for youth and hyperactivity and hyperproductivity. We're not really, aging is not a particularly inviting space in the way that it's talked about in general society, which is, of course, that whole ageism piece. So I think that's one of the key drivers of a lot of the problems that we have in the care system and the supports around older people, because the service providers are not dealing with their own aging, and are probably carrying internalized ageism without even realizing. And so straight away there's a kind of a problem, if you like, in the space between yourself and the older person, because you haven't attended to that in your own life. Then the other kind of main point I would want to make is what's the lens that you're bringing in terms of what questions are you asking, what curiosity are you bringing, as Callan's also talked about. And there are, I've been advocating for a few years now, and it's starting to, I'm seeing a little bit of progress, and if other people are aware of examples, I'd love to hear them, where the first conversation that's had with an older person is when you're engaging with them as a support service provider is about their important connections. That we have a specific tool called Connect 2 as well. So connection with self, others, creativity, nature, and something bigger. Let's understand what's important to you, how connected are you feeling, and what role might we play in either maintaining or reinvigorating or restoring a connection that perhaps is broken or something's happened there. If that could be the first conversation, not the 50 million forms or the, and people are, oh no, it's so private. And I say, are you kidding me? You are in the shower with this person, but you can't ask them about their important connections. Like, really? But so where organisations do that, and then of course that information, that discussion needs to inform then, that then becomes your lens through which everything else happens. So it will changes the entire dynamic, because then we're starting with the person as a whole person, not as a shower, a feed, a dementia, a 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock or whatever other language. So they're kind of a couple of things I'd offer into that space.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. Couldn't agree more. And let's hope that we do see some more of that shifting. I think you're right. There is some examples of those shifts, but it would be great to see some more. We might...
Helen, can I just jump in if you don't mind? Because I just want to take the wonderful opportunity that Ilsa's provided to really reinforce that point about sitting with our own ageing. And Ilsa, thank you so much for raising that. I mean, this whole campaign, Every Age Counts, started with exactly that question. How do you feel about getting older? Because we knew we wanted to do something to enable older people to age well. And yes, you can think about any of the policy domains like health or housing or transport or any of those things and say, okay, all of those things need to change, which they do, and to improve. But when we got underneath a lot of that, we thought, actually, we have to understand what is holding people back from aging well. And so we asked two questions. One was, how do you feel about getting older? And the second one, how do you feel about older people? And the richness of the responses that we got to those questions, and might I say, nobody sees themselves as older, because older is usually 10 or 15 years down the track for wherever we are. But there were so many overwhelmingly negative associations with the idea of getting older. So much fear, so much association with loss and grieving, whether that's of identity as a worker or as family members or of cognitive or physical function and so on. And we seem to be sort of stuck in a concept of aging, which is about 100 years old. We haven't kind of caught up with the new realities. And so everything we have done from that point has actually stemmed from that question, Ilsa. So I just wanted to reinforce the criticality of that being the place to start, and really understanding where that person is and how I can best connect. So thank you.
I think that's great. I mean, the irony is, of course, that we're aging from the day we're born, but somehow that concept of, so when you were talking also about, as a service provider, a worker, sitting with your own aging, I mean, that may be because you're moving from your 20s to your 30s, or, but for some reason that concept of aging, despite it being something we do from the very beginning of our life, is only connected to that sort of, when we get towards the end or in the last sort of several decades or whatever. So it is quite strange. And I often am reminded in one of the videos on the Every Age Counts website, where it's put in the terms of, if we're lucky, we'll get to our later years, and I think we also need to hang on to that too as a really important message. So look, at that point, let's see what, are there any questions, CC? Are there questions that you'd like to throw to the panel? No, can't. Nobody's there.
Got a comment.
Yes.
I think they're really great conversations about aging, and I think one of the ways that you check into your own process about how comfortable you are about it is how you feel about your own aging body, how you feel about your own greying hair. How many women here put a little message in if you tried to grow out your hair over COVID? The COVID pandemic time, I grew mine out, so I've gone badass grey. Oh, actually, it's a bit hat hair now, but thanks, Marlene. That's great. It was a really challenging time for me. I had to admit my own bias when I started looking at my image in the mirror and going, "Oh, I'm actually a little bit confronted by that. Why is that?" So I just sat with it, and because we had months of being inside, I just sat with it, and I put pictures of amazing grey-haired women like Joni Mitchell and on the walls just to kind of cheer me on and go, "You can do this. You've got this, Grey." And I wrote an article about it halfway through the year that got published on a website, Threshold, which I might pass on to you, Cece, if people are interested. And it's actually about my experience of, claiming the grey. So I think we think we're okay, and sometimes we're not. Which picks up a bit on Ilsa, what Ilsa's saying,
And also, thanks for that, Carolyn. I'm reminded with your story about an article I read during the lockdown by Nikki Gemmell. I don't know if other people saw it, about her attempt to go grey, and the kind of feedback she got from people around her that meant that she just couldn't do it because it was just too hard. So I think that, which comes back to, I guess, that ageism piece being, that we are in a social context.
Yes.
So I think, and it becomes, we need, I love that you've put those images around you to encourage you, with that journey that you were on. Because I think we do need those role models and people kind of showing us the way when we're trying to do something a bit differently, especially if we're going to cop rubbish from the sidelines.
Yeah. And I think it helps if you can sit in your own condemnation of yourself, because if you can't sit with your own image, how is anyone else? When people start throwing it at you, you kind of back down. So, I had some pretty heated and interesting conversations with people who told me I looked older. I went, and the problem would be.
And?
Yeah, exactly.
Just a couple of questions. Have any of the panelists perhaps got any examples of wisdom and resilience that you've seen displayed, I guess, shown by an old woman that you'd like to share? Any particular examples that stand out?
Well, there's our neighbour. She can barely walk. She has a walker, and she's very bent over, and she speaks broken English, and her passion is cooking. And she lives by herself now. Her husband died quite a while ago, and she cooks for us. For my parents live with us, and they connected up when they first moved in here. And so they have a kind of a friendship where they occasionally mum or dad drop down and say hi, and they inevitably come back with these huge buckets of biscuits that she's made for us. And so I just, I'm in awe of her, you know. Before she's now has trouble getting out of the house, but a few years ago, one day when she still rarely went out, but she made her way literally inch by inch from her front. She's 2 doors down, so from her house down to the down our driveway to mum and dad's front door. It was Easter, and she had a bottle of champagne and again some food that she'd prepared to share, you know, Easter gifts with my mother. And I just, as I said, I'm in absolute awe of her. I mean, that talk about resilience, and that still exercising, you know, the creativity and that desire to serve others, you know, getting in touch with what's meaningful for her, you know, absolutely persisting despite the physical barriers.
Indeed.
And Ilsa, you've reminded me of my neighbour who is in her late 70s and has recently had to have quite extensive surgery, and but recovering well. And, you know, through that period and before we'd sort of developed a relationship where we're neighbours and so on, we look out for each other. And her son lives with her. And during this period, he had a very, very violent, very severe psychotic episode, and caused himself, unfortunately, a lot of harm. And anyway, he's home now, and we got through that. But it was a very, very distressing episode. And because we couldn't sort of physically really be close together and visit and so on, we were exchanging texts. And she, as I was expressing how I was feeling and so on, she sent me a beautiful image of an incredible bunch of flowers, and it brought me to tears, just, you know, the beauty and the idea of that. And she sends me an image of a bunch of flowers every day, and
gorgeous.
And so every day I have a beaming smile. I've got goosebumps now just telling you about it. But that tells me about the resilience of this woman, but also the deep compassion and capacity for love. So, yeah.
Just a reminder. Oh, sorry, Jacqueline.
I was just going to make the comment. I think often wisdom has a character of quietness and introversion, and I can think of lots of people who I've come into contact with who I feel are very wise, but it comes out in small ways. Like it might be, you know, I can think of one lady who looks after her very elderly mother, and this lady's in her 60s herself, but her mum's on a walking frame, cognitive aware, doesn't speak much English, but every day she lets her mum walk to the sink, wash a few dishes, and then walk back to the couch. And then when her mum's in bed, she re-washes those dishes because it's not, you know, done well enough. But it's her wisdom and love and compassion that allows her mum to, you know, try and do those things. And there's so many of those maybe tiny stories, but they're so full of that thing that we call wisdom.
I love Elaine Castle's comment. My mum is 93, still drives and visits many elders in the community. Always amuses me when she refers to a person who is younger than her as old. That's classic. That's a great story, Elaine.
And just a reminder to, you know, any audience members who would like to ask a particular question of the panel. And while we're waiting for any other questions, I've got a couple more for you. I'm just interested to know, and we've touched on this a bit before, Marlene. I talked about, you know, how can we change that story? How can we change the narrative? But again, I think I'd like to hear from all of you about how can we as community members, what can we do? How can we support a change in attitude towards older people?
You want me to kick off?
Yeah.
Okay. Look, we would argue that the best way of changing community attitudes is to build awareness. And we know that all great social movements have started with raising our awareness and raising our consciousness about what's around us. And, you know, to borrow from the feminist movement, so that to see the personal as the political. And so for us, it's about becoming acutely aware of the ageism that we see around us, and then having some of the tools and resources to start to combat what is actually behind some of those assumptions, or behind those behaviours, or at worst mistreatment. And ageism can take many forms. We talk about malevolent and benevolent ageism. And benevolent ageism is that kind of well-intentioned but nonetheless belittling or diminishing form of attitudes, where we might tend to be overly protective of an older person, or we talk down to them, we treat them as a child rather than a fully formed human with agency. It's the sort of thing that allows us to ignore their wishes because we kind of know best. And then, of course, there's the malevolent ageism, which is intentionally cruel or abusive or neglectful. And it's absolutely based on seeing the older person as being somehow lesser than. So, you know, when you're out and about and you see those forms of ageism at play, it's about starting to challenge them. And that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, I've seen ageism at the shops. I've seen older people being overlooked or invisible. I've seen ageism at a doctor's surgery when a health professional talks past an older person to the carer or to the relative, or when the older person's concern is brushed aside because it's just a function of getting older anyway. You know, we've all seen those things. And in some respects, some of us are guilty of those things. I know I am. I've seen it in myself when I made decisions for my parents that I thought were in their best interest, but I actually didn't give them a choice, or I didn't give them a chance to voice their wishes. And I've seen, you know, family members be overly protective. So, you know, we're capable, like you said, Helen, in the introduction, the Am I Ageist quiz. We have internalized this stuff, and it's about developing a consciousness and awareness about that, and then starting to have gentle conversations. So it's not necessarily being known as the fun police all of a sudden and rejecting the dinosaur birthday card, or the birthday card that tells you you're incontinent, or, you know, over the hill and aging fast, or whatever it is. But it might be about saying, well, why did you choose this card for me? What are you telling me? What are you trying to say? And what's wrong with getting older? I'm actually very proud to be my age and what I've done to get here, and I'm looking forward to the next little while. So why are you giving me birthday cards that liken me to a monkey, or whatever it is? So it's just about opening those conversations in a gentle way, because this stuff is so endemic and pervasive. It's so tolerated. We breathe it in our air, and we have done since very early on in our lives. So this ain't going to change overnight. No one's saying that we have to break any relationships with people we have, but it is about starting to challenge and starting to push back.
Any other comments, suggestions from the panel, other panel members?
I think it relates back to some of the things we've already been talking about around owning our own aging in whatever way we can, you know, and we'll all be in different stages around that. And then, yeah, the birthday cards is one that really grates on me. It's really hard to buy a card, you know, for anything kind of 50 plus that hasn't got some so-called joke. So, I mean, for me, what I'm doing is obviously not buying those cards, but what I'm thinking about, Marlene, now is, you know, maybe do we collaborate on some kind of national campaign where if we all started saying to the shops that sell the cards, how come, you know, and again, not to break the relationship, but just to say, why have you only got these really ageist cards here? You know, I'd love to buy a card here, but I can't because there's really no options, or something like that. You know, if we could kind of have some mass movement just around the cards, that might start something. Because there's just this, and the, you know, the jokes like, because with the cards, and I guess just generally in conversation, there's often a lot of jokes which, if you imagine them as if they were sexist or racist, there'd be like an awkward silence around it, but people still do tend to laugh at the ageist jokes. So that's one that, again, it's a delicate balance, because you don't want to be the fun police, but just somehow holding that space, or whether it's actually saying something to the person later, you know, if you're in a group situation, not to necessarily confront in front of people, because we don't want to shame people necessarily. You know, we could go out with our kind of guns blazing, but but in the end, actually nobody wins. Like, and then it's sort of it's not an open space. It's, as Caroline was, you know, it becomes it's not a curious space. It's not a tell me more space. Then,
no,
you know, if we be confrontational with individuals, I think we could confront systems quite energetically.
Yes.
But individuals, we need to try to keep that relationship intact. Yeah.
And if you look at strength-based models, you do what works. So, for example, in my costume business, we were in the middle of photographing a series of images last year. One of a 78-year-old woman who's wearing one of my costumes from an exhibition. Now, she was in a rocking chair, but her image was dynamic and fierce and wild. Now, when that image goes out, that's more powerful in terms of selling an image of positive aging than me writing a letter to say, I don't like your greeting card. They'll just say someone else does. So I think it's just about saturating the market with better images, telling people this is what we want. So that's how NDIS is working. You know, the consumers are telling people what they want, and slowly those services are now starting to happen. So I think there's great potential for people to work together on these sorts of campaigns.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that it is about providing a different conversation rather than, you know, doing that, you know, this is wrong. I mean, I think there's a place for that too, because I think, for example, you know, the cards is not something that most people wouldn't realise, wouldn't even think about that until it was pointed out to them. You know, this is actually, you know, ageist. It is an opportunity for a conversation around that, and I think that's really important. But I think providing different alternative images, and images that are really a reality, as we've talked about, you know, that sort of notion of older people being one homogenous group. We need to be challenging that around there are completely, you know, different ideas. And I can see in the chat there's a question from Matilda that leads into that, or follows on from that, really. Advice about how to gently challenge someone's ageist attitudes towards themselves. So for an older person, I guess, who is, you know, describing themselves in a way that, you know, could be seen as ageist. How, for workers, what's any advice about, you know, how to tackle that, how to go about that?
I think if there's a chance to have a gentle, open conversation, you know, I think, tell me about that. I feel like you're almost ageist against yourself. Is that, like, how are you feeling about aging? You know, what's happening for you, and kind of inviting that conversation. Maybe they could make a costume with Carolyn. And there's some great literature around, because part of the challenge with a lot of this as well is finding alternative discourses, I guess. Yeah. So being in the work that I'm in, you know, I've read some really great books like Aging as a Spiritual Practice by Lewis Richmond. He has a Buddhist perspective, but it's not only for Buddhists. And he has some really interesting things in there around, I guess, attitudes to aging, but also ways to invite engagement with your own aging. And there's, you know, more and more of those sort of publications coming out. which, I mean, the person, yeah, it's sort of, again, as we've sort of said, everyone's different. So you wouldn't be able to prescribe from this distance, you know, what kind of conversation and what's driving that. But even just an openness to it, to have the conversation, it may open something up.
Yeah, I think, you know, as I said, it sort of all starts with awareness. And I guess have become conscious of when I tell myself things like, I'm too old to. I'm too old to learn to play the piano. Well, am I really? I'll probably never play at, you know, the opera house, but I could still give it a go and have some fun. Or I'm too old to whatever it is. You know, when I start conversations in my head or sentences like that, I just take a moment to stop and reflect and think about it and maybe reframe it as to what am I telling myself? Am I too old to play at the Sydney Opera House? Well, probably. Am I too old to have a bit of a go? Well, no, not really. So that's the first thing I say to myself. The second thing I say to myself is, if I start with I'm too old to, or it's too late to, I start to think about, well, what help would I need? Who can I call upon to help me get to that point? You know, it's okay to ask for some assistance and to ask for some help and to talk about it with people. So that's the next thing I say to myself. And then the other time I notice it in myself is if I'm at a clothes shop or something and I'm trying something on and I think, or I say to myself, oh, you're too old to wear that skirt, or you're too old to wear that top. And then I think, actually, how do I actually look in that skirt? How do I feel in that top? And then it reframes the decision for me. It's not about my age. It's actually about how it makes me feel. And if it doesn't make me feel right, then I discard it. But if it does, I'm happy to wear it. It gives me confidence. So it's those small internal moments that we can all continue to have those conversations with ourselves. And this ain't going to happen like that. You know, this is a process. This is a process.
So no, go on, Caroline.
I was just going to add to Marlene's comment, because I think we all have those dressing room moments. And I always look in the mirror and go, what would Tina Turner do? You know, like our grandmother moment, you know, she can wear anything, you know, they're women claiming it back, really, aren't they?
Absolutely.
So if you want to wear the spangly skirt, you just go for it, Marlene. I bet it'll look awesome.
I thought so too.
I was listening to the radio on Saturday or Sunday, over the weekend, anyway, last weekend, and heard it was Tina Turner's birthday. She turned 81, and it was an old track of hers, a blues track, but her familiar, you know, powerful voice. It was just a delight to hear. So so I think that's probably a good message for all of us. What would Tina Turner do or think? I think, and I guess that, you know, like to follow on from Matilda's question, you know, as a worker, then it's about having that conversation, trying to reframe that, saying, well, it's not about being too old or too late. So let's talk instead about what you would need to be able to do that. So it's a different, is this how we can support you to do that? And I guess that comes back, Ilsa, to that conversation, you know, at the very beginning about making sure it's, so what's important to you, what gives meaning, what do you want, how can we help connect you with those things that perhaps have always been important in your life and you've now lost that connection, rather than, you know, sort of starting from that premise of, you know, how as a 90-year-old can we connect you, you know, which is then in that context of what that person thinks they're able to do now as opposed to what's been their passion their whole life. So, any other comments around that?
Just wanted to throw in as well, something that I really try to do is hold that balance of owning that there are challenges that come with aging, not only because of ageism, but because our bodies are getting older.
Yeah.
And one of the other things I really love about the map of meaning framework is around the outside is reality of self and circumstance. And so, you know, I think sort of we've got, we're in a bit of a strange situation. You know, there is all this negativity around aging, but there is also this other sort of emerging image that's kind of like hyper capable aging.
Oh, yeah.
which is out of the reach of most. But, you know, some people can jump out of planes, some people can ride, you know, motorbikes around Australia or whatever when they're 100, but most people probably can't for various reasons. And so, you know, holding that tension for people. So I think, you know, if someone is perhaps struggling a bit with their aging experience, it may be because of a number of physical challenges, for example, they might have that are real things. And so we're not wanting to minimize that and pretend it's not happening. But I guess the point is it's not the whole story. That's not the whole person. You are not your illnesses or your physical challenges. So that's something that can be hard. And I think also someone's mentioned here around being a great role model, and that's someone really close to me who's 9 years older than me. She admitted to me after quite some years of me working in the aging space and kind of wanting, because I'm kind of obsessed with aging. I want to talk about it all the time. And she said that she realised when she was looking in the mirror that she was hypercritical around the appearance of wrinkles. And just actually she was in such a habit around that she hadn't even really realized that that's what she was doing. And through the kind of, because I kept on wanting to just talk about aging, just generally attitudes to aging, anything to do with aging, she kind of put the two things together herself and then told me, oh, I've had this moment where I've realized this is what I'm doing to myself every day. And so I'm trying to change my own, you know, that inner voice, I guess, around who is it that I see and what do those wrinkles mean? You know, they mean a life well lived. They mean all the fun I've had in the sun. They mean, you know, lots of laughs, those kinds of things. So I think that role modeling, you know, in a gentle way can be really good as well.
Ilsa, can I just check? There's been a couple of questions or comments in the chat about the meaningful map. Is that available on the website?
Yeah, it's you can get it. We've got two websites, but the one that's probably more interesting for this audience is the See Me Know Me website. It will go out in the follow-up email that you've mentioned. Merri Health have the links, and it's also through the Meaningful Aging website, which is more the service provider space. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. We're almost out of time. I'm going to sort of wrap up shortly. Any sort of final comments, pearls of wisdom from the panel members?
Can I just jump in and say to Athena Alex that you've summed it up beautifully. Zoom even offers a touch-up filter, so it's difficult to fight such a systemic attitude. That says it all to me. So thank you. I never knew that, but thank you. That's exactly the problem. That's it in a nutshell. So thank you, Athena Alex.
I just wanted to say, I'm picking up on one of Ilsa's comments around wisdom being often quiet and gentle. I think that's very true. For my boldness and all the hats and bells and whistles, a lot of my work is incredibly quiet. And I'm just mindful that as it's the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women, that a lot of the space people travel in when they've been experiencing violence, physical, emotional, financial, whatever, it means that people carry a lot of their trauma quietly and in their bodies in ways that are unrevealed to them sometimes and to others. So the work, in whichever way you have an opportunity to sit with women, is often quiet and gentle because it's an antidote for everything that hasn't been okay for those women. So I just don't want to forget that today.
That was Jacqueline's comment about the wisdom, the quiet and gentle moments.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah. Which you've prompted me also to think about resistance, because, you know, one of the things I guess we're talking about is how we resist ageism in our own lives. And some study I did years back around domestic violence, and this amazing article, I can't remember the author, but it was about small acts of resistance that women will do in the context of domestic violence that helps them survive and then maybe even thrive when they get out of the situation. But perhaps that's something we can bring into this discussion about ageism and aging. And maybe there are small acts of resistance that we can bring into our own lives. You know, if we're not feeling like having that difficult conversation or confronting the shopkeeper or whatever it is, but are there small acts of resistance as we claim our space, you know, that bringing back our See Me, Know Me campaign, you know, to enable ourselves to feel better seen and heard, even if it's us to ourselves, and then maybe it's with one other person who we really trust.
I was very taken by Ilsa for tending to our own ageing. Like Ilsa, I've had, for some reason, for years and years, been very interested in ageing. And now as I approach it myself, I think that I stand at a point of actually being quite excited, at least anticipatory. I know there's going to be lots of loss, but I also believe that there must be a counter to that, which, you know, is in our own self-knowledge and awareness. I'm aware that in the US, there's a much bigger movement towards ageing as saging, I'll call it, compared to here. There's a lot more information available, models, paradigms available in terms of how we think about our own ageing. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested to maybe just Google that, ageing as saging, probably bring a lot up. But people like Rick Moody, who puts out a newsletter in the US every month, which is full of wonderful things about ageing. And the other thing that, as a last thought, I would just really want to encourage anyone who has a bit of an instinct that they might need some help with this to come and get some help, come and find someone to talk to just on a one-on-one, and experience some of that curiosity and some of that quietness around having these discussions. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to share with, particularly with the panellists, some of the great feedback from the participants. Thank you, Merri, and all participants, inspiring and some great takeaways. I really believe this conversation is so important, and would you consider running a series of these discussions? Here's a new entrepreneurial activity for us, perhaps, to do. Thank you for all your insights. I've really enjoyed and benefited from today's discussion. Plenty of food for thought and reflection. So that's great to know that it has been. Personally, I've just thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity to facilitate this discussion. It has indeed been such a rich and you know, really thought-provoking conversation. And I know that I'll go away in terms of, you know, reflecting on my own personal situation as well as the work that I do. On behalf of Merri Health and the Elder Abuse Prevention Networks North and West, I really would like everybody to join in thanking each panel member, and I'd also like to thank the audience for joining today's Women's Cafe, bringing light to the value of older people, especially older women, on, as we've pointed out, this International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. As we've mentioned during the session this morning, we will provide links to the work of each of the panellists, and we'll follow up with additional information to everybody who's registered and joined us today. We will also be sending around a quick survey to all participants to support our work in the prevention and response to elder abuse, tackling ageism, and supporting meaning and purpose in the lives of older people. If you have any further questions or would like any additional support or information, you can contact the email address for the Merri Health worker that's been provided in the chat. So again, thank you to everyone for such a fabulous morning, and we hope that the remainder of 2020 is filled with joy and renewed time with family, as we've discovered is really one of the key sources of meaning and purpose for people and with other loved ones. So thank you all again.
Thank you.
Bye.